Welcome to the Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community, a space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. You were just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Joshua Colangelo-Bryan. Joshua is Special Counsel at Human Rights First, where he spearheads impact litigation and advocacy efforts to uphold democratic principles and support human rights defenders globally. Beyond representing Guantanamo detainees, he has sued Turkey for assaulting peaceful protesters in Washington, D.C., the Trump administration for attempting to deport a college student based on her protest activity, and a U.S. pastor who fomented legislation in Uganda criminalizing the LGBTQI community. Josh has conducted human rights investigations in countries such as Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain. Okay, well, hello. I'm really excited and honored that you decided to join me on the podcast Voices That Propel Us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing as well as one might in these times. And thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining today. And, I feel like you offer a perspective that I haven't had yet. So I'm really excited to explore just your journey, your work, your story. So just starting off, can you please say what originally drew you to human rights work and what keeps you rooted in this field after 2 decades of facing some of the world's most entrenched injustices?
So it wasn't an area I had really thought much about until I was graduating from law school in the late 90s. And right as I was graduating, a military conflict in Kosovo in southeastern Europe was resolving, and there was obviously going to be a huge need for reconstruction and related humanitarian aid. I had done nothing in those fields, but just reading the newspaper one day, for whatever reason, it struck me that I should try to go volunteer and do whatever little bit I could to help people. And so, slightly long story short, I ended up there for a number of months right after the conflict ended, doing an emergency shelter project. It was an incredibly compelling experience. It was really my first time working in that kind of international environment, seeing directly the results of human rights violations. And from that experience, my passion for this kind of work began.
Okay. No, that's really incredible how you say that. And it just makes me think, isn't it so wonderful and just amazing how life just works out sometimes? So I even think I could be walking or taking a different path. I come across this flyer and it sends me to this event or something. And I don't know, it's just funny how those very small moments in life can completely transform you. And I think that's beautiful how you said that happened.
Yeah, I'm sure some people have it all planned out and then actually are able to effectuate the plan.
Right.
But as you say, for some of us, it's almost hard to explain how these little twists and turns happen that, if you follow, you may end up in a place or doing work that you never anticipated, but that you find entirely compelling.
No, it's the same with me too. I'm very, go with the flow type person, but I've been really grateful and lucky enough to have amazing opportunities to come with me. But I'm just no, I'll just see wherever life takes me. I'm going to trust in the universe. And I feel like some people look at me what are you thinking? Don't you have a plan? I'm I'm just trusting in the universe that it's going to end up the way I'm supposed to. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, how would you describe empathetic strategic lawyering, and why do you think that empathy is such a radical tool in the fight for justice?
I think when you're talking about clients who have suffered in grave ways. Obviously, one issue is trying to vindicate their legal rights through litigation, through going to court, through arguing points of law. But those, in order to effectively do that, at least in my experience, you need the client's trust so that you can have discussions and get information in a way that's necessary for the litigation. I think doing that in an unempathic way is probably impossible. But even setting aside all of the more strictly legal work, I've just always found that if I'm talking to a human being who has experienced something terrible, and that person is trusting me to help them, I'm pretty quickly, in most instances, just drawn into their story, want to understand what has happened to them, and try to grasp it as best I can. In terms of representing people at a place like Guantanamo, lawyers were the only connection those people had to the outside world. The detainees were not talking to their families. They were not getting visits from friends. They weren't having phone calls with anybody. You were their human connection to the universe outside the detention facility. And so that I found really, in some instances generated quite personal relationships that in a way sort of took on a life of their own, even independent of the legal work.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. And I really love your approach. And just in your opinion, do you feel like there are others? Like, is it common for people to have that same approach to like connecting with people as human beings for who they're representing? Just because of my perspective, I feel like there's not that as much empathy as you've described now. But just from your perspective, do you feel like there's a lot of that kind of empathy that other people in your field have?
So if we put aside the kinds of lawyering of high price cases that you see on TV, often if you focus on people who have gone into public interest work, I think many of them do it because they are naturally drawn to people going through hardship. Certainly not to say all of them do. I've seen public interest lawyers who don't have great rapport with their clients, but it's certainly not uncommon in that context, in that kind of work for those kinds of lawyers to be really personally invested.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think that's approach, and I think that's something that people should strive for. So I'd love to talk about your book next. So your book, Through the Gates of Hell, offers a rare inside look into Guantanamo. So what do you wish that people understood about Guantanamo that isn't often discussed in public discourse?
So the book obviously is set in Guantanamo, which is maybe the most infamous prison in history. It touches on a lot of legal issues, national security questions, advocacy strategies, but at the core, it's a story of a very deep friendship that I developed with one particular client, and how that relationship developed in that context. Certainly when I went down to Guantanamo for the first time and was going to go in and see a detainee, I was actually a little worried for my physical safety because we'd heard these were all really bad guys. And even if they weren't all really bad guys, maybe some of them were. So I was nervous when I walked into the first room where I was going to meet someone who was being held there. But I saw this very slight man who looked up at me and gave me kind of a radiant smile. And then even though he was shackled to the ground by one ankle, he tried to get up to shake my hand. We ended up having a very casual, easy conversation within moments of meeting each other, and from that point on, really developed a relationship. I think one important lesson for people at any point, but maybe particularly today, is that when political leaders demonize a group of people, like the Guantanamo detainees, we were told they're all the worst of the worst. When you do that, and then typically accompany it with some deprivation of their rights, inevitably you're going to be victimizing people who don't match the description that you've applied to the group as a whole. And so today, when the US government is actually sending more people to Guantanamo and again calling them the worst of the worst, this time it's immigrants, not supposed terrorists. We need to remember that there are individuals being unfairly vilified in that way who don't match the description at all. That's maybe the biggest lesson that I took from Guantanamo was, if you get to know a human being who's part of a group that the government is demonizing, the demonization of the whole group really stops working, because you can see it's just not true. I think that's something that would be helpful for all of us today to recall that when you peel back the layers of that onion and you talk to people who are in some group we're being told is evil, particularly when they're all lumped together without any kind of due process, you're gonna find people who do not match the description at all.
No, that's a beautiful point that you brought up. And actually, that's the whole reason why I wanted to start this podcast. So, I feel like I definitely agree with you. I feel like there's so much demonizing, stigmatizing, stereotyping, just like putting labels on like actual people. And so I want to tell like the human stories behind that. So, for example, there's so much anti-trans legislations. And so, I'm having trans folks come onto this platform and telling their stories and being like, hey, this is just me. Or, I feel like people on the left, we get demonized too. Like we want to tear down this country and, we hate everything. And it's just like, no, but everyone, I would say because of my networks, most people on here have been progressive so far. But, it's just like, everyone keeps saying we just want more love and unity, in this. So I just hope that people who have those negative views of these communities, of our voices, like actually listen into this podcast and be like, no, we're just people telling our stories, and we just want like equity, like the freedom to live our lives the way that we want to. We're not looking like to really take down anything that's, positive, or we just really want to put more beauty in the world. And I really admire you for doing that too.
Well, and none of it is to say that there aren't people doing really bad things in the world, and there aren't people who should be prosecuted, and that there aren't people who even need to be removed from society. But that all has to happen through some sort of fair process, as opposed to saying that, millions of immigrants are all criminals, when it's just a factually false statement. And it just leads to, indiscriminate hatred.
Yeah, no, and I agree too. And I think that's something that comes up too, just like how does the media frame like a certain narrative? So I'm not sure if you are aware, but like we had some like just protest over in LA, and the National Guard got involved in everything. But I noticed that the media kept focusing on this like burning car. And it's like, but that's not telling the whole story, for the most part, because I've been through lots of protests, in my life. And, for the most part, like things are really peaceful. But for some reason, the media and news keep focusing on, oh, these are dangerous rioters destroying our city. It's like, it's a little bit of that, and there is truth to that, but the way they frame it is like, oh, this whole protest is unruly. It's like, that's not true at all. Yeah. And I'd love to talk more about that, the work that you did with that person that you were talking about. So, just in terms of like working with him, how did it help to reshape your understanding of like humanity, resilience, or solidarity?
So, he had been through a range of terrible abuses. And when he was describing some of those things to me, which had been done, at the hands of Americans, I found myself even being skeptical at points. Is he accurately describing this? Would Americans really do the things he's telling me about? It was quite an education when relatively soon we started to see the release of documents written by U.S. government personnel who in fact had witnessed the same or very similar abuses. So we had corroboration of things that were cruel and outlandish that had been described to us. Despite all of that, the worst experience he had was being held essentially in isolation. He was alone in a solid wall cell 23 hours a day. Wow. He could scarcely communicate with anybody, even on his corridor, when he was held there. In his cell, the only material he had to read was a Quran that he had memorized years earlier. He had no other books. That isolation, that inactivity, in his words, was driving him crazy. And he said it's worse than being beaten just to sit day after day. So there were points when he felt the weight of that isolation. He felt the anxiety about not knowing if he would ever go home, even though he was never charged with a crime, where he felt all those things very strongly, but was still able to maintain a little bit of hope. There were other times when I would be down at the base and he would be feeling those things in such a way that it really extinguished his hope. On a number of occasions, he tried to kill himself, including once when, during a break in a meeting, he actually was able to hang himself by the neck from the top of his cell and cut a huge gash into his arm. And when I came back into the room, I found him like that. We were able to get him down. He had surgery. He survived. But those were the periods when he just didn't see any prospect of things changing. The remarkable aspect to me, in part, was that ultimately he persevered and was able to keep a sense of who he was and enough hope that things would change, that when he finally got out 5.5 years after he was first detained, he was able to go home and rebuild a life. I don't think I would have that ability. I don't think I would have that capacity under those circumstances. So that to me has been just nothing short of amazing. Even now, 20 years after he got out, a little less than 20, but getting close towards 20, he is mostly able to focus on his current life, on his family, on friends, instead of being sucked back into the darkness of that past experience. Again, I feel like I would be lost forever if I went through those things. So watching him not only survive, but make a life, it's beyond a lesson in resilience.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think, I'm really grateful that you're shedding light on this as well, because I feel like regardless of what people might feel about like the issues or, I don't think anyone should be okay with us treating like another human being like this, to like put them through so much suffering. And that's what I've learned too. Just like, I've learned a lot about like oppression too. And I feel like people feel better about like oppression or, just doing horrible things to humans when you dehumanize them, strip away their humanity. So, I think, you telling that story, I think hopefully can resonate with people and be like, no person should have to go through something like this.
I think for some people,
Mm-hmm,
as you say, just the idea of abusing another human being isn't acceptable
mm-hmm.
ever.
Right.
Um, I think for some people, unfortunately, if that person is in one of those vilified groups, they really
Mm-hmm,
don't care what happens.
mm-hmm.
And they're almost gratified by the person being abused.
Right.
Then I think there's maybe a third group of people that in general wants the world to act humanely, but says, well, if he's a bad guy and we need
Yeah.
to torture him a little bit to get
Yeah.
information, I can understand that. What's important for people in that category to remember is, as I said, if you take
Mm-hmm.
a whole group of people, you don't figure out who did what without any process, you just lump them in as one big collective batch of evil people.
Right.
You're going to end up committing abuses against people who actually have never taken any action
Mm-hmm.
against the
Right.
US. And so, my client wasn't even accused, forget evidence, forget
Okay.
being charged with crimes. He wasn't even accused of doing anything hostile to the US. And
Mm-hmm.
so my question is always, if you're someone who sometimes is willing to sacrifice humanity because you hope doing so keeps you safe,
Right.
what's the security or strategic interest in locking up and abusing someone who you don't think has actually done anything to harm you?
Uh-huh.
I mean, plainly, that makes no sense. It
Yeah.
only, costs time and money and sullies a country's reputation. So for people who feel that conflict of wanting to see the government do the right thing, but wondering
Mm-hmm.
if at times it needs to get a little rough, again, you
Yeah.
have to remember that without a legal process to figure out who's who,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna end up abusing people who you think are actually innocent.
Right, right. No, and actually, thank you for sharing that. So I want to ask you that you spent 20 years fighting a system that was designed to deny transparency and justice. So to you, what does persistence look like to you in that kind of environment?
Well, I think once you take on um, once I take on a particular matter,
Mm-hmm.
it just becomes part of my existence, and I'm
Uh-huh.
going to keep pushing it and keep working on it until there's a resolution. No matter how long that takes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not to say in any respect that I'm unique in that way. There are a lot of people who do that, but
Mm-hmm.
um, once I decide that I'm going to be engaged with respect to a particular situation,
Mm-hmm.
then the only natural thing, the only thing that feels natural to me is to persist in pursuing it. And some of that, maybe as a lawyer, if you take on a case, you really are signing on until the case is done, absent some special
Mm-hmm.
circumstance. So no matter how much of a slog it is, no matter how much pushing you have to do, no matter how much you're fighting against powerful forces, it's the job. And I think what would really feel bad would be to stop, because just as a matter of your own self-worth, I think it would be really hard to reconcile to stopping just because something was hard.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And so for myself, I consider myself an activist, and I'm really trying to like build solidarity and work with people on the grassroots level to make change. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing, to make change on that level. So you've taken on cases ranging from suing foreign governments to challenging US deportation of student activists to opposing anti-LGBTQ legislation. So for you, what is it that connects all of these struggles with each other?
Whenever there is a person or a government or an entity that is abusing some power advantage it has over someone else, I find that enraging. And once, and maybe if I could seal myself off from all information, this would be different. But once you're aware of situations in which that dynamic is occurring, I think just being, getting engaged is the best tactic I've figured out to promote my own mental health, because I feel like at least I'm doing something. And then once you're engaged, taking whatever steps you can think of, and sometimes it's purely legal, sometimes it's non-legal advocacy, sometimes it's a mix, whatever steps you can think of to aid the person who's getting abused just because he or she has less power in this given situation.
Right. No, that's really beautiful. And, I want to ask you, when the legal system itself is part of the harm, how do you find ways to fight for justice within the system?
So in the case of Guantanamo, there were some important court decisions that let us go down to the base to meet with people, even though the government did not want that to happen. But as time passed and we were litigating over questions about what kind of process people should get, it began to get clearer and clearer that the chances of a judge ordering your client released were bad, even if there was nothing legitimately implicating your client. Now, this wasn't too long after 9/11. Judges, under those black robes, they're human beings. I think people were very scared about the possibility that they could let somebody go and that person would end up, harming people once they were free. And so really for the first time in my U.S. legal career, it appeared that the court system wasn't going to get us what we needed. And so we pivoted and we started a campaign that was much more focused on getting information about our clients into the public and also working to encourage the governments of our clients' home countries to negotiate with the U.S. to bring them back, because that was something that some countries had done. So, it was an instance of saying, well, we're going to keep litigating the case because in part that's what keeps us going down to Guantanamo, but we need to figure out a way outside the court system. I mean, it can be a scary idea, not only for a lawyer, but I think for anyone who's got a sense of the value of having a functioning legal system, to feel like that system isn't working. Because most of us don't want to go live in the sorts of places where there is no functioning legal system, since effectively you have no rights. So that's scary when it starts feeling that way here. At least in the instance of Guantanamo, we did find other paths to take in order to try to accomplish what it appeared we weren't going to be able to accomplish in court, even though we had very good arguments to make in court.
Okay. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And how do you approach communities in crisis in a way that centers dignity and is really respectful of the people?
So, part of my work focuses on human rights issues, not for litigation purposes, but for general advocacy purposes. When you do that, I think one of the most critical pieces is to talk to community members, talk to people in the communities who are trying to defend human rights, and find out what, if anything, you can do as someone outside that community that would be helpful in the eyes of people in the community. I mean,
Okay.
they are the real experts in terms of what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes there will be utility in having a person like me advocate on behalf of a particular group in relation to a particular issue.
Right.
But to find out, what it is that would really help, uh, it's sort of an obvious idea, but asking
Mm-hmm.
the people who are most closely engaged is the best approach I've ever found, at least.
No, I agree with you too. So actually, what started my career into activism is this wonderful AmeriCorps program called Public Allies. And
Hmm.
they taught us about asset-based community development and looking at like what assets communities can bring versus looking at deficits. And
Huh.
so one thing that we really learned is like we need to listen to the people in the community to so a part of our service we did like community projects and service days. And so we went into communities and we held these town forums and we wanted to hear from the community what are the most pressing
Yeah.
issues in your community that you would like us, as young people to address, and we'll work with you to do this project. So, for me, I think that really taught me like, oh yeah, we have to talk with the people and not just go in based off of our own assumptions if we're not coming from the community, like, oh, you must need this in your community, or, I don't know, like an example, like, oh, your sidewalk must be broken. So, we should fix that. So I think just like getting rid of our own assumptions and actually listening to people, like, this is what our community needs and this is the support that we need. And I think that doesn't
Where were you
happen very
working?
often. Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
Where were you working?
So it was called, are you familiar with AmeriCorps?
My brother did it many years
Okay.
ago, right when it was probably a couple of years after the program started.
Yeah, no, so it was called Public Allies. And they their whole tagline is everyone leads. And I really love this because they really have like a lot of like folks from like marginalized communities, and their whole thing is like we should get, people who represent the communities to become leaders. So, through that program too, I learned that, I was a pretty soft-spoken person, but like to own my leadership too, and just like dismantle and go against these stereotypes of what traditional leadership looks like. So, yeah, it's a really beautiful program. And I don't know if you've had a chance to check out my podcast, but a lot of people from my Public Allies family have been on the podcast, and everyone keeps saying, yeah, Public Allies, it helped to build this foundation. But, I think
Yeah.
that's really important, listening to our communities rather than having assumptions. And I feel like elected officials, or, yeah, I just feel like that doesn't always happen, like listening to the people in the community to find out what their needs are.
Yeah. I mean, listening instead of talking sometimes is just
Right.
such a more valuable thing to do. I know what I'm thinking. I know what I'm going to say.
Right.
But I often, have no idea what somebody else's perspective is.
Right, right. No, thank you for sharing that. And, I really love this about your work because I'm trying to do it for myself as well, just in terms of like building solidarity with the communities that I work with. But you form deep connections with clients and communities across the world, which I think is like really fantastic. So, with that, what have these relationships taught you about solidarity?
Well, I hesitate to try to draw any grand conclusions. I always think
Hmm.
there are people smarter and more qualified than I am to do that.
Hmm.
I think ultimately, what I have learned is that making personal connections under those difficult sorts of circumstances is something that really lasts.
Hmm.
And so, ultimately you can maintain an engagement with a particular place or group or set of issues
Hmm.
once you've established that relationship. And, a few of those key relationships, I think, really
Yeah.
can let you over the long haul engage in exercises of solidarity with people, because
Yeah.
you always got that connection. And if things are going wrong, somebody might reach out to you, and
Hmm.
the trust that develops also facilitates that kind of work.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And the next question I had for you, so how do you hold grief, injustice, and hope together in this work?
I really most often try to approach things on a task by task basis. So, not to say
Mm-hmm.
that we don't create long term goals for a particular case or project or endeavor, but you know, trying to gauge every day if you're
Yeah.
getting closer to your long-term goal is really hard and I think can be pretty demoralizing.
Mm-hmm.
So if just for day-to-day purposes, you're dividing things up into the concrete tasks that have to be done as you work through the process, that at least keeps me from feeling too much general despair at not
Mm-hmm.
doing enough.
Right.
I also find that if you engage with people who are going through some kind of trauma and you have a role or responsibility in terms of trying to help them,
Mm-hmm.
it actually, in a strange way, works against becoming too despairing because your
Okay.
job is your focus. Working with this other person, that's your focus. Um,
Yeah.
and you don't have as much space to feel depressed because you're dedicated to these steps that you think are going to assist someone who you've got an obligation to assist.
Right. No, no, thank you for sharing that too. And actually, that's something that has been coming up with a lot of guests too. So, I think this work towards like working towards like positive social change, it can be really heavy. And, I really appreciate your perspective. But what do you feel that like keeps you going in those moments though? Because I feel like it is like about us also having that self-care for ourselves and, sustaining ourselves so that we could keep, doing positive work towards our communities.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna claim to be selfless about this, and I have a nice place to live and a gym to go to and family that supports me. So there are plenty of advantages.
Yeah.
But what I know overall is that doing this kind of work makes my life much better than it would be if I didn't do the work. So in a strange way, or in a way that I don't hear expressed all that often, there is a form of self-care in doing the work because
Uh-huh.
it makes my life better.
Yeah, no,
And
that
in
makes
a
sense.
way, that's
Okay.
sort of I think an ultimate definition of self-care is
Okay.
doing something that makes you feel better about your existence
That's beautiful.
and
I think
about
that's
how you're
something.
spending your life.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that I need to get there too. I think it's just like I don't always have the healthiest of boundaries. So I feel like I keep
Yeah,
burning myself. But then when I get to that point, I start to build even like apathy and kind of like, oh, I maybe I don't care anymore. But I think deep down is like, no, Denise, that's not who you are. You're just burned out right now. So I think that's where I have to watch out to like if I put too much of myself out there, I'll start to like not care, even though, I know that I do.
I'm sure everybody has those moments of
Yeah.
just feeling wiped out and thinking, yeah, God, I would love just to watch TV today.
Right.
I think at least I assume everybody has those moments at times. And yeah, you need to find ways to like get your wheels moving in that kind of specific moment.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for sharing. So, many of the work that you work with are everyday individuals who are standing up against powerful systems. So with that, what have you learned from grassroots human rights defenders?
I have learned about the ways in which people have strengths
Mhm.
and dedication, um, and what sometimes seems like a tirelessness that I feel that I could never match. And
Okay.
that's not to say that human rights defenders don't feel things like everybody else, but when someone is openly defying an autocratic government in another country to say, hey, you need to respect human rights. and that person knows they're facing a risk of potentially jail or worse.
Mm-hmm.
It is just stunning and humbling
Mm-hmm.
to see. I don't know how we bottle that and give it to everybody. I wish there were some way to do it, but I think we can maybe take some comfort from the fact that there are everyday people who didn't even ever think about doing that sort of thing in advance, but find themselves in a particular challenge and decide to get engaged in ways that at the very least are really brave, because if they're feeling the fears we would understand them to feel, they're still pushing through that and doing the work.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And something that I want to do with this podcast is give people hope that like anyone is capable of making a difference. You don't need a title or um even do like social change work as a career, but like you were saying too, like everyday people are capable of change. I think even those very small acts of kindness can really add up. So with that, how can ordinary people, so my listeners of this podcast, support movements for justice in tangible and meaningful ways?
I'm sure there are more ways than I even know. So let me not pretend to give you some exhaustive list. There are creative people who are going to come up with 50 things beyond what my legalistic mind might. There's communicating with your elected representatives, attending a protest, giving $5 to an organization that's doing work that you support, running for some local office, going to law school and dedicating your career to fighting for the underdog. Again, I've mentioned this before, but I think the part that we don't always think about is how doing any of those things, how getting engaged, actually will make you feel better when you have a sense that things are going badly in the world. So, and for me, on some days, it's like very small steps, very little things, but just being active in trying to push back a little bit against the things that are happening that you find horrible or scary or offensive. It really does something for you as a person, at least in my experience.
Yeah, no, thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask you about that too. So, what gives you hope today, even as global human rights landscapes can feel bleak?
Yeah, and I am the wrong person probably to answer this question, because if I start thinking in terms that are really broad, my perspective tends to go towards the dark rather than the light. I know people who have sort of abiding faith in humanity, or a sense that ultimately things happen for the right reasons. I don't always get to that place. So for me, what I need to do is, again, my little jobs, that sort of keeps me in a headspace where I avoid feeling hopeless, and I get the sense that I'm doing something to help. I suppose I would say that if you look at history and cycles of 100 years or something like that, you can see some developments putting the entire planet's health aside. You can see some developments that are positive in terms of individual rights. The number of people, being killed in wars, even though it's obviously too many, even if it's just a handful. Trying to imagine what it was like being in the Great Depression in the United States at the outbreak of World War II and how grim that must have looked. But people have found ways to manage. So if I get into that broader type of thinking, that's probably one place where I try to comfort myself a bit.
Yeah, no, thank you for
But I'm
sharing.
more than interested in everybody else's strategies on that because
Yeah.
I need help on it.
Yeah, no, same here. So, after decades of confronting injustice, what does liberation mean to you now?
I would think of that in very um, discrete individual terms about
Hmm.
when it literally a client getting out of jail or detention
Hmm.
when they have been wrongly in that situation, or a client getting out of some other circumstance that should never have been imposed on them or is really harmful.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know that I have a big philosophical conception of
Okay.
what liberation means, except maybe to say I think it's really important for all of us to constantly be trying to make sure that our minds are as free as possible, at least to receive
Hmm.
reliable information and think about it critically and draw appropriate conclusions, as opposed to essentially being imprisoned in some
Right.
preordained mindset.
Right. No, thank you. And what do you hope that readers will take away from Through the Gates of Hell?
I have been told that it's a bit of a page turner. So I first, I guess, hope
Uh-huh.
that people will find it interesting and compelling. I hope they will take some comfort from the fact that two people who really had no business becoming friends, given how different their backgrounds were, and given
Mhm.
that they met in the bowels of Guantanamo,
Mhm.
developed a relationship that is alive and well over 2 decades after they first said hello to
Yeah.
each other. Um, in a way, it's a very small story. It's just a
Mhm.
couple of people, but I think it's emblematic of what can happen between human beings when
Right.
you deal one on one, person to person, um, as opposed to just relying on what you have been told about that other group. And I suppose I hope that that lesson sort of informs how people think about any political leader who tells them that some entire class of people is just evil and out to harm them.
Right. Right.
That's something that we always should be thinking about really carefully, because that kind of thinking leads to Japanese Americans being thrown in jail during World War II, or McCarthyism, or this Guantanamo operation. And reasonable people always look back and say, "Oh, what a big mistake that was. That didn't keep us
Yeah.
safe. That was a terrible idea." So we really need to stay alert and think long and hard when some elected official is telling you that
Mhm.
all immigrants are criminals or other things of that ilk.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And just as we're wrapping up, when you imagine a more just and liberated world, what does it look like? And what role do you believe that stories and community can play in getting there?
Yeah, I've been thinking about the demagoguery that we're seeing today.
Hmm.
Um, whether it's a Russian president saying all Ukrainians are Nazis, or
Right.
an American president talking about trans people or immigrants.
Mhm.
And I think that one way to counter that has to be with really specific individual stories about people who are in those maligned groups, but who are not in any way fitting the descriptions that they've been given. So, I think stories in that sense probably play or should be playing a really critical role, hopefully to move us out of this moment when we appear to have forgotten the importance of applying laws to people equally, respecting basic rights of people. Hopefully this little arc of history will be remedied a bit when we recognize the harm that comes to everybody with that kind of thinking.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing then. Truly, thank you for your time. I had such a wonderful time talking with you. But just lastly, how can people find you if they would like to connect with you?
I guess not all of the social media ways, but
Okay.
LinkedIn, Instagram. I think I'm generally the only Joshua Colangelo-Bryan on any platform. So it's not like you're going to have to sift through a bunch of options.
Yeah, no, the same with me too. So my parents are really creative with my name, so it's spelled differently. It's really easy to find me. I'm like, just
right,
put my name.
Just put it in there.
No,
Exactly.
but truly, thank you, and you're doing such wonderful work, and I do wish
you.
you all the best and success in what you're doing, and you're putting so much beauty and joy out there, and I appreciate the work that you do, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.
Every time I feel so mad and sad and bad, I say to myself, relax, lean back, it's a brand new day. And every time I feel so down that a frown is all